All right, let's jump right in. We're going to look at this incredible ancient story. It's all about a massive, high stakes promise that almost immediately smashes headfirst into a life or death crisis.
So you got to ask yourself, what happens when this divine, unbreakable promise collides with our most basic human survival instinct? This is the core question in the story of Abram and Egypt. And it's a raw story, It's about faith, it's about fear, and yeah, it's about failure.
We're really going to unpack this whole thing, and not just as some old historical account, right? But as this really powerful drama. It's about what happens to us psychologically and spiritually when our best laid plans just completely fall apart. So let's set the stage. It all kicks off with this just incredible promise. But it gets challenged, like, right away by a seriously harsh reality. Talk about whiplash, right? On one side, you've got Abram getting this unbelievable, world-changing promise from God. I'm going to make you into a great nation. And then bam, on the other side, a brutal famine sweeps across the land. It's so bad it's threatening his very survival. So right away, we learned something crucial. The promise isn't some magic shield against hardship. Nope, it's the beginning of a major test. So he's facing starvation, and he makes this huge decision. And here's the kicker. He doesn't consult God. He decides, I'm going to go down to Egypt. Now, you have to understand, going down to Egypt wasn't just a geographical thing, like heading south on a map. It was symbolic. He was leaving the land that depended on God's rain for a place that depended on its own human-controlled predictable resource, the mighty Nile River. It's a classic move from faith to self-reliance. And that decision, to rely on his own plan instead of God's promise, well, that's where things start to spiral. It's the beginning of a descent, and I don't just mean geographically. It's a descent into a mindset that's totally, completely driven by fear. So as they're getting closer to Egypt, his whole focus shifts. It's kind of wild. He's not even worried about the famine anymore. Now he's terrified of his own wife, Sarai, or more specifically, her beauty. See, he knows that in the cutthroat political world they're entering, a beautiful woman without a strong protector was basically seen as up for grabs. He's convinced that some powerful guy's going to want her, and together they won't think twice about just killing him. So what does he do? He comes up with this scheme, a plan that's cooked up entirely out of this fear. He tells Sarai, look, just tell everyone you're my sister, not my wife. And his logic is all about him. They'll treat me well for your sake, and my life will be spared. It's all me, me, me. And that's what intense fear does, right? It just narrows your vision down to pure self-preservation. That sacred bond of marriage, that two become one thing, it's just shattered in that moment. He's literally separating himself from her to save his own skin. And you know what's crazy? At first, Abram's fear-based plan, it seems to work. But as we're about to see, the price he pays is just devastatingly high. So just like he thought, Pharaoh's officials see Sarai. They can't stop talking about how beautiful she is, and word gets back to the king. And Abram, posing as her brother, he gets treated like royalty. He gets showered with gifts, sheep, cattle, servants, the whole shebang. On the surface, you'd think, wow, this plan's working out great. But this is where the real price tag becomes clear. All that wealth he got, it wasn't a blessing. It was basically a payment for his compromise. Think about it. He gained a bunch of stuff, livestock, servants, material security. But what did he lose? He lost his wife. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's palace, into his harem. And this wasn't just some personal tragedy, a husband losing his wife. No. This was a full-blown crisis for God's entire promise. Sarai was supposed to be the one, the channel through whom this great nation would come. With her gone, the promise was basically broken. His plan, the one designed to save his own life, had totally backfired and put the whole covenant on the brink of collapse. And it's at this absolute lowest point, right? Abram is powerless, his clever plan is in absolute ruins, and then the story takes this sudden, dramatic turn. I mean, let's be real. Abram had wealth, sure, but he had lost his wife. He had literally traded the future of God's promise for his own immediate safety. And humanly speaking, the situation was hopeless. There was nothing he could do to fix it. He was rich, yeah, but the promise was dead in the water. But then, God stepped in. And in a single moment, the entire situation gets flipped on its head. Abram couldn't clean up his own mess, but God sure could. So what does God do? He acts, and he acts decisively. And get this, it's not because of anything Abram did right. It's because of Sarai. He sends these severe plagues down on Pharaoh and his whole household. And these weren't random plagues. They were so specific that Pharaoh knew exactly what was going on. He immediately understood the cause. I've taken another man's wife. And what happens next is just this incredible reversal of roles. Pharaoh, the pagan king, the guy Abram was so scared of, he calls Abram in and he gives him a serious moral lecture. He asks him straight up, "What is this you have done to me, and why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" I mean, the irony here is just so thick you could cut it with a knife. The man of God, the guy who got the divine promise, is getting schooled on integrity and honesty by the very pagan ruler he was terrified of. So Pharaoh just lays it out. Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. He doesn't mess around. He immediately gives Sarai back, and Abram is basically escorted out of Egypt with his wife and all the stuff he'd acquired. And just like that, the crisis, a crisis created by fear and lies, is over in an instant, all because God intervened. So Abram getting kicked out of Egypt, it's not just a punishment. It's actually the beginning of his ascent, his journey back up to the promised land. And you can bet he's carrying a very profound and very humbling lesson with him. This whole episode really boils down to a powerful contrast. Just look at the two sides. On Abram's side, you have actions driven by fear. That leads to a terrible plan and, frankly, a humiliating rebuke. But on God's side, you have actions driven by faithfulness to his promise. And that leads to a perfect rescue and the ultimate proof that his covenant stands. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. God's promise doesn't depend on us being perfect. It depends on his faithfulness. Abram failed. I mean, he failed spectacularly. He was totally consumed by fear, and it made him do something selfish and short-sighted. But God didn't abandon him. He didn't scrap the promise. In fact, sometimes our biggest failures become the perfect backdrop to see just how amazing his grace and faithfulness really are. So that leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about for ourselves. When a crisis hits your life, what's your first response? Do you immediately start cooking up a plan born from fear like Abram did? Or is there a way to find a quiet trust in a promise that's bigger than the problem? It's a question that echoes from Abram's failure all those years ago right into our lives today.